Welcome back, everybody. We're getting ready to go to Midnight Madness at KD Dragway this weekend. But before we load the truck up, I needed to make some adjustments to the carburetor to richen up the air-fuel ratio. The dogs are out in the yard today playing with a frisbee. Pretty nice weather, and the weather this weekend is going to be beautiful as well. Now, I've mentioned in earlier videos some of our history with KD Dragway and Midnight Madness. It was the event that Billy and I first helped get started with the help of track owner Alan Lynch. KD Dragway and Midnight Madness was the biggest, craziest, wildest night of no prep racing, street style flashlight start racing anywhere in the country. It was a homecoming 2 or 3 times a year to street racers all over the eastern part of the country. Now, the whole time we were involved with Midnight Madness, the event did really well. The small tire class especially did very well. At one point, we were having to cut them off at 64 cars because by the time you got hard tire and big tire and the small tire class was so large that we were running out of pit space to park racers. And that carried on for a long time. The rules were very open. There were very few rules. And we did okay for a long time. But the track owner wanted to continue to push the envelope with payout, wants to raise the payout and raise the payout and raise the payout. But the problem with raising the payout constantly is the higher the payout, the bigger the sharks that come to get a hold of that bait. And that event was started for the local guys, the small time guys, street racers on a limited budget. And there was a lot of them. But we started to have a problem once we started getting some tube chassis cars showing up. And at that time, nobody had ever heard of running a tube chassis small tire car at KD. Like, nobody would ever even consider doing that because the track is so rough, it's so difficult to get down. And then the hill at the end of the track, the shutdown goes straight up this hill. So, you know, when we first got started, we never thought we'd ever have to deal with a tube chassis car. But we did.
So, what do you got today? You got the S10 out?
Yeah, the S10's in there, in the trailer.
And still a 5.3 little twin turbo deal?
Well, single turbo now.
Oh, single turbo now. Now a big boy.
Yeah, little, not really.
No? Big enough.
Big enough.
Big enough to get the job
Hopefully
done.
big enough for here.
Midnight Madness was beginning to gain attention from heavy hitters all over the country, such as this S10 pickup that was tube chassis with the engine set way back in the frame. Mr. Eddie Grimes out of Maryland. Now, Eddie's a smart cookie. He's no dummy. And the payouts were so good at KD because the car counts were really good, because the spectator counts were really good. It was nothing for us to pack that place full of people. And I mean, they'd be parking along the road and walking in because there was nowhere left to park. KD's a pretty small track. So When Eddie found out that there's this big money race and it's run well and it's a great event and it's, lots of spectators, I mean, it's a freaking good time. And he's got this badass S10, and according to the rules, he's legal. So he starts making the trip on a regular basis from Maryland down here to Ohio with this S10 pickup. And I'm telling you, the S10 was bad. And back when Eddie had it, the S10 hadn't even begun to reach its full potential. But even when he first brought it down, that truck just did incredibly well. For a tube chassis car, it was light enough, the engine was set back far enough that he could put ballast where it needed to be, and he would just murder everybody in his path. Now, the truck was really fast when he brought it down. Right off the bat, it did really well. But nobody really thought that he was unbeatable. Nobody gets a time slip at KD, at Midnight Madness. There's no timing system. It's flashlight start, finish line judge. Nobody gets a time slip. So even if you ran beside Eddie, you don't know whether you did a really good pass or whether you just spun the tire someplace, or, you don't really know what his truck did. You don't really know what your car did. So it kept everyone guessing. Well, that all ended when people started bringing draggies to Midnight Madness.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today we're going to do something really cool. I run a draggie on my car when we're running no prep races, and I don't know who turned me on to this. I can't remember, as last year at our first no prep race. But anyway, if you do not have a draggie, you need to go buy one. Let me show you what it is. This is a draggie, very small, and it's spelled D-R-A-G-Y. So what this is, it gives you a virtual time slip.
Now, these little draggy devices are pretty slick. They mount on the roll cage or in the car and connect to your phone and give you a virtual time slip as soon as you make the pass. And Turbo John actually went out and tested one of these things back to back on the track to see whether they're actually accurate or not. And here's what he found.
So the draggie said 124, 330, 495, 147. The time slip from the track, 118, 325, 490, 147. So mile per hour was dead on. ET was a half a second, a half a tenth off. Not a half a second, a half a tenth. So if anybody says a draggie is not accurate, they are incorrect.
Now, you may be wondering, what's the big deal? Who cares if anybody knows what their car runs? Well, it is a big deal, because the worst possible scenario happened one night at KD, and after this pair of cars went down, nothing was ever the same again. Now let's slow this down real quick and let me explain to you what just happened. Now, in the left-hand lane, you have Josh Linden from Ohio in a Turbo LS Mustang. In the right-hand lane, Eddie Grimes and his S10. Josh Linden has a draggie in the Mustang. Josh jumps the light on accident, trying to get a little bit of a head start on Eddie. He was a car out ahead of Eddie at the 60 foot. And Josh made the best pass he had ever made at KD during this run, and he still got beat by a car and a half. That's really, really bad. Now, pretty much everybody knew that Josh Linden and a couple of the other guys that were there with him had some of, if not the fastest, stock suspension, stock floor pan, stock firewall cars on the property. And Josh had been data logging with a draggie for a couple of months, and he was continuously making improvements to his car. And based on the data that Josh had and shared data from other racers, Josh felt that he had probably the fastest stock suspension small tire car on the property. And he did, except Eddie. Now, when Eddie beat him by a car and a half, and Josh even got the jump, and he was out on him by a car, and Josh ran, let's just say 580, it was unheard of for anybody to be able to go that fast at KD. Now, everybody knows how fast you have to go to beat Eddie's S10. And unless you had a tube chassis car with the engine set way back and you had it light enough that you could add all the ballast to the back where it needed to be, you couldn't compete. A Mustang only has so much room in the back for ballast. There's not much overhang over the rear axle. That's why you see cars like Beer Money with barbells hanging through the top of the car, and you got like Mike Gunter with a wing mounted on the parachute behind the deck lid full of lead. That's why they're doing that. The Fox Body Mustangs are really good chassis. They work really well, but there's a limit to what they're capable of doing on a really bad surface. So the car counts began to dwindle, and it got to the point where it was getting tough to get 16 cars to show up. So we ran that same rule package for the rest of that last season, and then I decided for the next year we were going to have an Outlaw 10.5 class and another class called OG28s for small tire, stock suspension, stock firewall, and stock floor pan cars. But unfortunately, the track owner didn't like that idea, didn't want anything to do with it. So we got the boot from KD, and the events slowly dwindled down to the point where I don't think they were doing very well. So the track owner sold the track, and now a new owner has it, and we're going to try and help them bring the events back to what they used to be. So guys, that's pretty much what happened with the tube chassis situation at Midnight Madness. And, you know, unfortunately, when Midnight Madness was created and when Dig or Die was created, there was no rule against tube chassis cars. It's just there weren't any tube chassis cars that street raced small tire back then. But as these events continue to grow in popularity and the payouts continue to grow, you're going to start attracting a different clientele. You're going to start attracting different kinds of cars. So just because these events were started with street racers in mind, at this point, in this day and age, if you want the events to remain focused on those kinds of racers, and there's a lot of them, and they need a place to race. Probably going to have to consider either two different classes, an Outlaw 10.5 class like what I wanted to do a couple years ago, and an OG 28 class that focuses on stock firewall, stock floor pan, stock suspension, and an Outlaw class that will allow tube chassis cars or back half cars so that they have to race each other. If we continue to allow the small tire no prep thing to go the direction that it's going, it's not going to last. Not the way it is right now. So that's it for tonight, guys. We're all loaded up. We're going to try and head down there tomorrow afternoon. Midnight Madness, Katy Dragway, South Webster, Ohio. We'll see you there.
You want the details? Here
I'm going to get them whether I want them or not.
All right, so Katy Dragway tomorrow. Gates open at 2. Big wheel race is around 8 o'clock. Me and Bill are going to do that. Chip draws around 9, and then first round will be after that. So there's no rush to get down there in the heat of the day. This is a nighttime thing. Hope everybody stops out and says hi.
Weather report?
Oh, gorgeous. Like high of 77. Like, you're gonna need a hoodie when the sun goes down. It's gonna be gorgeous.
Well, you have hoodies available.
Some. And I have a whole new batch of girly, glittery tank tops and t-shirts.
Sweet. Now, let's get this video finished up before one of the dogs decides to shit in the background again.